All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Okay. This is week 3. I had up here a resource. I talked about it in Periscope on Monday, but I know some cannot make it, so I thought I'd bring it up. Petapixel is a photography resource for photographers. It's got podcasts, tutorials, reviews of phones or cameras. It's a great site. In fact, if you go to it's petapixels.com or petapixel.com. If you go to the tutorial link, it's got some pretty cool tutorials. Like the one I went over Monday was this one here. Well, freeze it so you can see it. Using Photoshop to create a magical photo of man rowing in the clouds. You could probably use what we're going to talk about tonight, Pixlr.com, to do the same thing. But you're basically taking 2 photos, a guy on a boat on a river and some clouds, and merging them together in Photoshop and doing post effects. And so there is a week or 2 we spend on post effects. Basically taking, I did in my grad program, I had a project I had to do, right, in graphic design. So I chose to restore a picture of my grandma and grandpa. Before they got married, they had wedding pictures and stuff, but before their wedding, they didn't have any real nice photos of themselves together, like dressed up, because grandpa was off to college, grandma was off to college, and they just didn't have time to do it. So anyway, I had 2 really nice pictures around the time they were in college and merged them together. And so since then, I've been really interested in, plus I gave it to them for their 50th year anniversary, which was awesome. But ever since I've been in post-production, it's been a kind of a passion of mine in my family, and also just touching up photos, old photos and things like that. And there's a week this semester there where you actually do that restoration. But this site has great tutorials on photos and restoring photos, touching up photos. So again, it's petapixel.com. And the second one I have up on the board I want to make mention is Picasa. If you've not installed Picasa on your home computer, your Mac or PC, please do so. It's totally free to do. And I've used it for a number of years. It's really a great program. And last night, I don't know if anybody tried to go on to Foki. It was down last night for most of the day, I think. So today, I believe it was up and going. So if you were trying to get on Foki last night, I did send. Who was it that sent me that message? Were you sending it? And so yeah, anytime that happens, let me know. I'll let everybody else know. I was down for a bit. So Picasa, petapixel.com, and then Pixlr. Bookmark this on your browser, pixlr.com. Let me show you what it looks like here real quick. Okay, Pixlr.com is basically a stripped-down version of Photoshop. And what's nice about it is, once you go to Pixlr.com, I suggest going to the editor, and you can just watch me if you want and go to it. The best browser, and I didn't have it on, there's Chrome. Firefox doesn't like it too well. So let me go to Chrome and fire it up. If I have the newest version of Flash, I'll be okay, but I don't. But Chrome comes with the newest version. So anyway, I can create a new image. I can open an image from my computer or from a URL. We'll real quickly show you some stuff, some tools available to you in Pixlr. So let me just get an image screenshot of the event we did last Saturday. And so here's an event. A photo was taken, and I want to do some cropping and maybe some bringing in a text image or text and writing on top of it. What's cool is I have over here on the right side layering, just like you do in Photoshop. So I can create layers, and I can come over here and say I want to add some like a white film over it to give it kind of an antique look. Maybe I want to put some text on top of it or something. So here I'm moving that white layer on top of my picture layer, and I can go in here just like you can in Photoshop, and I can take the opacity down of that photo just enough to where I can take it then and put it on a banner ad or something on a website and put some text over the top of it. But what's cool about it, you'll notice it's doing layering. What's also cool about Pixlr is you can open up a native PSD file and save things with the layering as well. It's not PSD format, it's called PXD. So let me show you that real quick. I'll go ahead and save this as you can do it as a PNG, a JPEG, bitmap, TIFF, or PXD. That will be the equivalent of PSD in Photoshop, those of you familiar with Photoshop. And what's great about this is once I save this, I can put it on my Dropbox account, I can put it on a USB drive, and go to any web browser in the world, pull up that PXD, and continually edit that file. The other thing it'll allow you to do, Pixlr will, if you have a native PSD file that you've been working on for a project, it will allow you to open up PSD files as well. Now you'll notice on the left side on the screen here, the tools are much like in Photoshop. You've got your pointer tool, you've got your crop tool, your marquee tool, lasso tool, eraser, gradient tool, blur tool, smudge. And then if you go up to filters, a lot of the same filters are available here as we use in Photoshop. Like 90% of the tools we use in Photoshop are going to be in here that most people use. So glossing blurs in there, pixelation, diffuse, vignette. And so awesome app, and it's totally free. Now you can pay for a commercial version that gets rid of the ads, but you don't need to. It also does have a phone app for Droids and iOS that kind of does like filters. So you can apply filters to your photos as well. So I recommend, we will be using it this semester. When we get to the week where we're doing, or as we go on throughout the semester, if you ever need to lighten up a picture, you need to take red eye out, you'll learn how to do that this semester. Pixlr.com. Questions on Pixlr? Yes? No, it's not, but it looks like it, doesn't it? It looks very close to GIMP, and very, very, very close to GIMP if you've ever used GIMP before. But it's an awesome, and what's great about Pixlr is they constantly update it like GIMP does, but it's online. And so, awesome app, and it's for both the kind of novice post editors to those that really like to play with them. I know some of you might really love to play with Photoshop. And it's free, it doesn't cost anything, it's awesome. And it runs best in the Chrome web browser. It does run in Firefox, you have the latest version of Flash, but I've seen it always run in Chrome the best. So, again, pixlr.com. Wanted to make mention of that before we get into tonight's discussion. And thanks for those that connected on Monday to the Periscope. Had about 10 in total, both face-to-face and online that came in, so that was not bad at all. So let's, I want to talk about, we did have our first TechScope Tuesday tonight, or at 3:30. How many got to go to that or got to listen to that a little bit, the TechScope Tuesday from 3:30 to 3:45? Well, let me just show you where you can find it, because they're all recorded. It's going to be every Tuesday from 3:30 to 3:45. I interview people on campus, students, faculty, local business folks. And so I'll go to the one for today, which we did, which was Gabby, which is our Twitter girl or camera girl here on campus. And she does an awesome job at it, by the way, and I'll show you what her website looks like in a second. But basically, TechScope Tuesday is a highlighting RBC programs, faculty, staff, and tech news of the day. I'm a geek, as you probably guessed, and I know a lot of you are as well when it comes to technology, or you probably wouldn't be in this building. You have a little geek inside of you. And so basically just sharing news of the day. And what I really love doing is shining light on people that you have no clue who they are. I love that. Like Gabby, or Abby does a lot, I call her Gabby. Abby does a lot of things here on campus. You've probably seen her at graduation, taking photos, if you've been to any graduations. Anybody seen Abby around campus, by the way, on events? And so, she just recently graduated in 2014, so she's not too far from you guys. And one of the things she does on the side as well, besides work here, is she does weddings and she does portrait photography. But anyway, you can go to myrbc.org and you can click on this replay TechScope. And what it's going to do is load the video of Gabby and I's discussion today. The other cool thing that we've got is what's called show notes. So if you missed it all together and maybe you don't want to watch the text scope at all, you want to just read the notes about who Abby is. It talks about her in this, so it goes over who she is, a multimedia specialist, 2.5 years. She does web stuff, photo stuff, Twitter, social media, Instagram. She's been here. She graduated in 2012. I said 14. 2012 when she graduated. Anybody like Blue October? She's really into Blue October band. And then also Dave Matthews Band. But Blue October is actually really popular. This is a screenshot of her Twitter page. That's a most recent photo she took, a portrait photography, which I think is pretty awesome. And in fact, if you just her Twitter handle is photography with an E on the end, basically. It's easy to remember. And she's more than willing to, help students. And, if you ever are around Abby, if you have a question or you see her on campus, she's really open to share what she does and how she got into it. And so anyway, all the way down to her email. We'll have that on every TechScope Tuesday. And I did end the TechScope with this, which is I want 2 students. So if you're interested, let me know. You can email me after class. I want 2 students this semester. One that's graduating this semester. Anybody graduating this semester? This is it for you? Okay, cool, awesome. We've got three opportunities there. 3 people maybe. So, and then the second type of student is a student that just started college last fall. Anybody that just started college fall 2015? Anybody? All right, so if you're fall 2015 student or graduating in May, shoot me an email and I'd like to interview you just to kind of get your perspective as an RVC student. So again, TechScope Tuesday, it's every Tuesday, 3:30 to 3:45 on Periscope, and it is recorded if you miss it. So tonight we're going to go over settings and contrast. And in weeks 1 and 2, one of the things we mentioned was the most important part of taking a photo or a good photo is what? Does anybody remember? What makes a good photo? Anybody remember what it was we talked about? Well, I'll give you some guesses here. Was it white balance? Was it contrast? Was it exposure? Exposure. We talked about that, remember? How exposure is the most important part, and exposure has a lot to do with what? The sensor in your camera or the light that's around the subject you're taking a picture of? Sensor a little bit, right? But more so probably leaning towards good light, right? You've got to have good light. You can have an awesome sensor, but if you have terrible lighting, there's only so much a sensor can do. And so great lighting or the best lighting you can get is really crucial. And so tonight we're going to talk about a couple things. One is exposure, the other is contrast. And then we're at the end tonight, you're going to do an in-class lab. So make sure to get your cameras out because you're going to be looking at all the settings on your camera and jotting them down in Eagle before you leave tonight. You're going to be submitting it. It's due tonight. So make sure, that's why one of the reasons I have you bring your camera. So make sure you get into your camera a little bit. Try to anyway each session. And then you will have a take-home. This week it's going to be on ISO and playing with ISO and white balance. We'll find out what ISO is more about tonight. And then white balance, you're going to use a combination of ISO and white balance to find the best exposure. You're basically going to go around campus, around your workplace, around Rockford region, and take 3 photos of different settings that I'll have you take a photo of, different, like say a outdoor, indoor type of setting. Then you're going to take 3 different ISOs and 3 different white balances for all of those settings, and you're going to figure out which one looks the best. We're only going to focus on the auto white balance features on your camera, not the manual one. We'll get to a manual later. So let's get right into it. Settings and contrast. The first one I'm going to talk about here, let me bring up my notes, is exposure. We'll go into exposure first, and we'll go into contrast next. Okay, so light is good, right? Light is good. We've said that, and light is something that you think it's just a given, right? That light's important, but you don't think anything about it unless you're actually taking photos, and after a while you're like, man, my pictures are terrible. What's wrong? Maybe it's because of light. And so one of the first things I learned as a photographer years ago, when I was a young kid with my mom, and she had a 35 millimeter, I had a 35 millimeter. After I graduated from my Brownie camera to a nice 35 millimeter film, was light was real important. And one of the things we used to do is go out early in the morning, even though I wasn't at that time, I am now, but at that time I wasn't an early person. But the best time was, my mom was raised on a farm, I was raised on a farm, and so we would go out early in the morning and we would take pictures of, we had a bluff overlooking the river, and we take pictures of that. We also had about 88 head of cattle. We would take pictures of cattle in the morning at 5:30, 6 o'clock grazing, just as the sun was coming up with the mist. And regardless of where you live in the world, really, that early in the morning, you're going to have some type of mist that covers everything for the most part. And what the mist does is it kind of glistens and puts like a different perspective on everything that you take a photo of, because the light will literally bounce off of that water, that condensation, and make things look differently, and actually sometimes makes things look newer, fresher. Even like on a farm, it was the same dirt as it was yesterday at 5 p.m., but it looks actually a little nicer dirt, but it's not. Or other things you might step in, it looks nicer, but it's not. And so, but it glistens and looks really pretty, but that's just because of the condensation in the morning of the dew. And so early morning, I learned, was a really good time to take a photo. And exposure is the key component I want you guys to kind of catch on this first few weeks. Is exposure is basically the amount of light that is exposed to your image sensor. In my day, when I first started, it was my film, right? But now it's, for you guys, it's your image sensor. The light is how long it's exposed, what type of lighting. Is it fluorescent? Is it your sunlight? Is it the headlights of the LED on your car? It's controlled by the film speed, or in today's vernacular, image sensor sensitivity. We did find out in week 1 and 2 that the image sensor is the most crucial part of photography, the best, to get a best photo, not as much megapixel, but the actual chip that's inside of that camera is what makes it a better photo, can make it a better photo. Also shutter speed, and then aperture. Remember aperture? The larger the number, the smaller the hole. The smaller the number, the larger the hole of light coming into your camera. Shutter speed deals with, okay, if you want a freeze frame of somebody jumping in the air, do I need a faster shutter speed or a slower shutter speed? Faster, right? If I'm wanting to take, I'm on a bridge and it's about this time of night, and I'm wanting to take lights coming towards me on a highway and blur them all together. Do I need a slower shutter speed or a faster shutter speed to make them all blur together? Slower, right? And so also, if there ever some water running, we talked about this last week, and it's running a creek or whatever it is, and you're wanting to make kind of look like movements happening, what do? Slower or faster shutter speed? How many think's faster? How many think's slower? Yeah, slower will actually make looks like a little movements happening. And if I can't do it because I'll blame my knee surgery on it, but even before my knee surgery I couldn't do it. If I wanted to jump 2 feet in the air, maybe some of you can do that, and take a snapshot of you, I got to have that shutter speed, again, what? Faster or slower? If I want to snap it in the air. Anybody like the movie Matrix or watch the movie Matrix ever? Okay. If you've never watched it, even if you don't like stuff like that, it's cool to watch just to see the special effects, right? The CGI effects. And one of the deals they did in that movie, kind of groundbreaking, the first one, was what? What did they do that no other movie had done up to that point? Anybody remember? They really yeah. Yep. Yeah, so that's still action and stopping, and then juxtaposition it, different ways. was the first film that ever did that. And so since then, a lot of films have copied that, and it's got much, better quality doing it. But, it's kind of cool that first time. And so exposure is controlled by, again, sensor sensitivity, shutter speed, and aperture. The amount of exposure is dependent upon the sensitivity of the medium. In this case, would be the quality of your image sensor. Now, I told you on week 1 not to go out and buy a nice brand new camera, because most of the image sensors you guys have, and I know what everybody has because you submitted it in week 1, is fine as far as quality of what we're going to be doing in this class. Now, if you're going to go work for, say National Geographic, you might want to get a better camera, possibly. But, for this class, we're just learning about what the settings do, how does it apply to my photos, what is good light, what is bad light, what's the best position to place myself to take a photo, framing the photo, all of that, which is real important. And regardless of what camera you have, you can apply those techniques. And so the amount of exposure is a sensitivity. Most of your sensors today are fairly progressed from what they used to be 5 years ago. Okay, they're pretty much the same. So here's an example of some exposure technology. And you really need to focus on this because you'll be doing this for your take-home. So we have an ISO of 100 with an f-stop of 2.8, and all it's doing is showing the shutter speed differences. So we start at the very left at 1.3 seconds all the way to 15 seconds. Now, what can you tell real quick just by looking at this? The faster the shutter speed does what to the light? Does it make it darker? How many thinks it makes it darker? Faster. It does. It tells us right there, right? But what is awesome is that the degradation of light, and by the way, because of light in this room, it's going to look much better on the screen on your monitor, but 15-second light at 100 exposure allows more light in, and the f2.8 is going to be a fairly small opening, not real large opening. That's why you need longer exposure. And so 1.3 to 15 seconds. Again, we have in this mix ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Those three. So proper exposure can make or break a picture. Exposure can change the appearance of a picture immediately. And I think I mentioned this, and I'll probably beat it like a dead horse this semester. Probably shouldn't say that, but I was raised on a farm. I'll probably say a lot of things maybe that maybe I shouldn't say. But anyway, if I do offend you, I apologize. But anyway, the exposure of a photo can make or break the photo. There's only so much you can do in post-production. There's only so much you can do in Photoshop. Have you guys ever had a photo you've looked at and you're like, I'm pretty good at Photoshop. I think I can do this. I'm going to make this picture awesome. Have you ever thought that before? I've thought that before. Spent 10 hours on it. It looked worse than it did at the beginning, right? And you're like, what in the world am I doing? And so the best way to do this is to, when I grew up, a saying that went around, you might have heard it is, if you're going to do something, do it right the third time, the second time, the first time, right? And it's the same way with you only have one time sometimes. Sometimes you literally only have one time to take a photo. That's it. And it's gone. And we think, well, that's pretty depressing, right? I've missed a lot of stuff in my life. And so, but if you get that shot and you capture it, it feels pretty good, right? Because you can remember it 5 years after the person's passed, or that friend of yours is gone, you don't get to see them anymore. You can pull up pictures and bring back inspiration, emotions, things of that nature, all from proper exposure, right? So here we have an example. And one of these weeks coming up, you'll be doing one on just exposure setting on your camera. It's that little button on your camera that looks like a plus and minus. But anyway, this one has a 0, -1, and a +1. And the exposure value is normally set for 0 on all of your cameras, unless you've changed it. And then when you go to change it, it fakes out the camera to say, okay, that's what it really looks like, but I want to brighten it up a little bit, so I'm going to +1 it. And notice what it does, Really brightens up the scene a little bit. If I want it even darker, I'm negative that. So you work generally in that exposure value to do that. Now we're not going to be playing with exposure this week for your take home, but there will be a week coming up we do that. So histograms, that's another one that's important that a lot of us don't use, that I'm going to have you start using this week, or at least noticing on your camera. So that word's supposed to be in my opinion, but it says eye open. The histogram is one of the most important features of your camera. Most all of your cameras have this, even your digital cell phone cameras have histograms, a lot of them do. And if you don't have it on your camera, when you bring it into Picasa, Picasa has a histogram on it as well, where you can see this very thing I'm talking about. So when a picture's taken, a histogram looks like this right here, okay? And you got degradation of stuff, and things are going to be moved. But the best histogram is pretty much like this right here. It has a start on both sides like this. It kind of comes up in the middle. It's a great histogram. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. You'll actually see reasons for that. So basically, a histogram is a graph that gives you the relative amount of light and darkness that's in that photo. Each square represents a pixel of brightness. The histogram displays every pixel collected. 0 is pure black. 255 is pure white. So pure black, pure white. The tonal range would be actually the subject you're taking the photo of, okay, a lot of times, somewhere in that photo. And that mountain can move, by the way. Doesn't have to be in the middle, but it does usually have to have a mountain of some type, and we'll talk about why in a second. Tonal range, you want a fairly good base tonal range, fairly good wide tonal range. Otherwise, your picture is going to be kind of pixelated and grainy. So here's an example of an actual photo with a histogram. And it's pointing to the parts of the photo where it got the histogram data from. So we're looking at a picture. There's no perfect histogram here. It says this one has broad total ranges, few midtones, plenty of highlights and shadows. So here we have, right over here in this area here, light. Notice it's kind of choppy here. This one is in the very middle, kind of really almost non-existent. Then this mountainous part here is just kind of like all the way to the edge. So this photo really doesn't have a lot of good lighting to it, and the histogram shows us that. And you'll learn more in just a second as we go on. This is an average histogram. Notice it's the center of it's peaked. It's got that mountain peak I talked about. Plenty of midtones. It's an ideal subject because the camera can see most of the midtones in the shot. And most camera meters will have no problem reading it. Some of your camera meters will not allow you to take a photo unless the histogram is around that look right there. You just won't do it. You can press it and press it and press it, and you're like, it won't let me do it. You ever had that happen? Because the light just wasn't there. And so now you could force it if you had manual mode, which some of you do, force it to manual mode and then take it, but it's still going to look terrible, right? And so the whole purpose of your camera not allowing you to do it is because of this right here. Does not have good enough lighting to justify the photo. So here's an example of a couple histograms. Both of them aren't the greatest, but the left one is called a high key histogram. And notice the colors in it are more white. Now, granted, you have a Dalmatian. Dalmatian's white. I'm guessing it's a white beach. And it's in the middle of the day with the white sun beating on the beach. So you're going to have a lot of high tones in that photo anyway. So it's a high key when you take that. On the left is indoors, very little light. You'll notice the histogram has shifted from the right to the left, meaning very low key and really choppy when it comes to the bar shadows that are showing in the room. So on the left, we have an underexposed photo. On the right, we have what's called a clipped highlights, overexposed. So underexposed, overexposed. Underexposed is going to be basically, looks like this. You'll notice it has a valley, but notice how it drops off. Or has a peak, but it just drops off and it's real jagged. On a clipped highlights, this is a part that's clipped. It's really jagged and it kind of goes up here. And you can really tell right in here, these parts cannot be fixed post-production. And it mentions on the left side on the underexposed the wasted space, which if you see that in a histogram, that's a sign of being underexposed generally. And this just blows up what I talked about earlier. The clip part, the shadow part, can't be recovered. I mean, I guess you could go in there with a pencil and some lines in Photoshop and put them in there. You could definitely do that. But the photo itself, you couldn't recover it from just the photo itself. So let's go into contrast. Contrast, just by looking at this photo here, you'll notice the bottom photo looks more grainy, choppy kind of like the waters subsiding from a storm. The top one is almost like you put, if you're familiar with Photoshop, like a Gaussian blur over the top of that water, right? It's just kind of blurry photo altogether. So contrast is a measure of the distance between brightness between the light and dark areas and getting that good balance. Now, if you go into Photoshop or you go into any histogram of a photo, contrast is always at the value 0 until you change it, right? And then most of the values in that are always at 0. Here we have an example here of images that tend to be flat or dull, are going to have low contrast, like a picture taken in the fog. You'll notice this one does have a peak, but that's it. It's all it has, a peak. Nothing on the left or right, a lot of empty space. Pictures that tend to be more intense or choppy or pixelated usually have very high contrast. Again, it has a peak, but again, nothing here, nothing there. The base is a little wider than the tonal range, so a little bit better quality. But you can see all these little choppy spots here where I'm pointing to. That's what that's going to do when you have high contrast. It's going to kind of make it a choppier look of the photo. This is a cool photo, kind of showing you the different histograms of one photo kind of broken up into different 3 histograms. So you have the top piece, which is just the boat only, and you'll notice it's fairly flat, not too much of a peak, not terrible lighting though. The middle has a good peak, but both spaces on the right and left are empty, so it's going to be more of a kind of a dull image because of that. And then the bottom one has that choppy space that was in that one earlier of the gate shadowing against the floor. Kind of gives that clip look. So if we take, though, all 3 and put them together into one histogram, we have a fairly good histogram there combined together. So the top, middle, bottom, all combined together. This is what you would see in your camera, the final result, which is a fairly good photo. So end of the day, that's a good photo as far as contrast goes. Now we're going to get some examples. I'm going to kind of get you guys' feedback on these next few slides, okay? So, by looking just at a histogram, maybe not so much the photo, is this going to have like a kind of a more of a whitewashed effect or more of a darker effect just by looking at the histogram? Whitewashed or dark? Whiter or darker? Just by looking at the way the histogram's leaning on the left. Yeah, more darker effect. Anybody else see anything about this? What's on the right side? What's going on there? The choppy stuff? You see that right here? This right here? If you come over here, what that's referring to is right in this area here. You can't really see it too well. It's just kind of blah in the image. And that's what this is referring to right here. This here, taking a picture of a moth, or I think it's a moth, an overhead image of it. Good histogram, bad histogram. What do you think? How many think's good? Good histogram. Yeah, it's got the peak in the middle. It doesn't just chop off altogether. It has something here, a little bit of black space here, and that's actually going to be this area here. But fairly good histogram by just looking at it. Good lighting. So Goldilocks of the 3 histograms. If it veers to the left with the peak, too dark or underexposed. If it goes to the right with no peak, too light, overexposed. If it's right in the middle with a nice kind of left and right between the dark and light, just right, correct exposure. So here we have an example of a kind of a, almost looks like a E.T. movie. Anybody remember E.T. movie? Or that's too old. Okay, good. All right, a few. So kind of cloudy, kind of maybe early morning. And notice it's got, just by looking at the histogram, it's going to be underexposed or overexposed. Remember? Let me go back and help you. Remember, top left is underexposed, which is going to the left. If it's overexposed, it's going to the right. So, by looking at the histogram, what's this leaning towards? Right, underexposed. And then, but notice here, has an underexposed feature, also has an overexposed feature. Both. Because it has the two peaks, so you have a little bit of under and a little bit of over both. A little bit of under, a little bit of over exposure. This one here, what's this lean more towards, under or overexposure? Both. It has a little bit of more, a little bit of over, right? But does it lean more towards over or under? You won't get in trouble for just, yeah. So if you look at, again, this here, underexposure to the left, overexposure to the right. This one here has overexposure in it. Boom. But it also has under. So both of them. Now, what part of the picture would you think is underexposed? And when we look at something underexposed, let me give you an example here of the underexposed. So remember, underexposed, it kind of looks, you know, almost whitewashed a little bit at times. Overexposed, choppy. Underexposed, blah. Overexposed, choppy and darker. So this one has a little bit of both. And so the darker overexposed and underexposure at the top. This one's not much better. Now this one's like in a valley of a mountain and you're kind of looking up. So it's going to be more underexposed. What about this one? Under or over? Again, go back to the key. Underexposed to the left, overexposed to the right. You can just remember that. Under, left, over, right. So this is under. All flatlined here. Pretty much all you can. I think if you have this on your monitor, it looks, you can see a little blue, mountainish kind of look to it, and blue sky, real dark. Under left, over right. Under left, over right. What about this one? Under left, over right. Over. And again, this one looks terrible on the screen. Looks better on your monitor, maybe. It doesn't look too bad there. Kind of like whitewashed snow, right, after a big snow dump that the East Coast had. These pretty awesome pictures that people took. You know, some of them having 3.5, 4 foot of snow. Crazy. What about this one right here? Under or over? How many think's under? Remember, under is towards the left, over is towards the right. So under exposure, leaning towards that. Now you get the picture of the person fairly well. Everything else is black. It's all underexposed. So this one here is, again, underexposure, leaning towards the left. Shutter speed 1/180th of a second. F-stop 2.8. A very low ISO, which means the lower ISO is going to give you a kind of a darker look and feel of the photo. And that's going to bring the underexposure. What's this one going to be? What kind of exposure? Under or over? Over. It's towards the right. It's going to be over, remember? Left, under, right, over, as far as what it's leaning. So shutter speed on this one, 1/60th of a second. 2.8 on the aperture again. But they bumped up the ISO. When you bump up the ISO, it's going to fake out the light to the sensor. And that's what ISO does. And it's going to make it more whitewashed. What about this one? Under, over, or both? Both, right? It's got both under and over, both. And the middle is pretty much flat line. And it's a lot of shadows. A few highlights, though, from the back sky. And that's it. Same ISO, higher f-stop, meaning smaller opening in the hole for the light to come in. And 1/160th of a second. 1/100th of a second, 2/8, an unknown ISO. But let's look at the histogram. Is it leaning more towards under or over? If this was a middle, this is the middle here. Right here, middle. Is it leaning more towards under or over? Under, right. It has a little bit over, but mostly under exposed. The overexposed would come towards the top part of the picture, the bright light around the sun, actually, probably right in the middle. Dynamic range. This is basically your cameras all have what's called a relative lightness and brightness and darkness. And there's dynamic range of a digital camera, not that big compared to film. So pretty much dynamic range is mentioned in digital photography, but it's not really utilized as much as in film photography. Okay, let's go to the next one. One more here I want to go over, which is contrast. And this is just an article I really like on contrast. And I'm going to blow this up a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so the title of this article is Improving Your Photography Composition by Peter Eisenberger, Arizona Highway Director of Photography. This guy just takes photos of the Arizona highways, construction, nature. This is his job. It's all he does. So he says in a recent column he did, he was discussing the awareness of light and its relative relation to the subject he was taking a photo of. It says, he goes on and says, light and shadow become integral parts of the composition, and it should be your first consideration when setting up a photograph. This guy had been filming photographs, both film and digital, for about 35 years. And so he says lighting is very important. So somebody's been doing it that long, we should probably take notice of what he's saying. He goes on and says that when lighting conditions have been evaluated and the camera position chosen, take the best advantage of the light subject relation to the next step is composing it. So lights first, then let's compose the photo second. When he's talking about composing the photo, he's talking about framing it within your LED finder, within your viewfinder of your camera, the best place to take that photo. So composing a photo is essential, an editing process, deciding what to leave in, what to leave out. Basically, it's accepted criteria for good composition. We can use what we talked about last week, rule of thirds in here as well. He goes on and talks about achieving visual harmony, dynamic tension, and faithfully following all these rules of composition will not necessarily culminate in a good photo. So what he's saying basically is you can follow all the rules that we're going to learn this semester on rule of thirds, contrast, but if you don't frame the photo right, it's going to be a terrible photo. You're going to notice it. And as you get to know people that know you, like you guys will get to know each other a little bit this semester and get to critique your work, you can be honest with each other and say, it's a little dark, or why did you do that? And then if you tell them why you shot it like that in that position, they might go, oh, okay, I didn't think of that. And so composing the photo, getting the right structure of how you're going to take the photo is real important. He goes on and says the rules are intended to be more guidelines and dogma, but will help you design a well-balanced image that are pleasing to the eye. Maybe the subject initially attracts viewers to stop and look at an image, and artistry composition holds them. What he's saying is the photo only does so much of the subject. You have to really put a lot of work into the structure of the entire image, not just the person, but the entire image. So an example is, I'll blow this up a little bit on the overhead so you can see it a little better. Here we go. So what do you see first when you see this image? What does your eye naturally gravitate to first? Be honest. Just blurt it out. The person, right? Okay. Then after you see the person, then secondary, where do you go to? Just blurt it out. Where do you go to second? The tree. How many goes to the tree? How many goes to the mountains below the person? How many goes to the valley to the right of the person? Okay, so most of you go to the tree second. Okay, let's talk about third spot your eye goes to. Where's the third spot your eyes go to? The mountains, okay? So you're talking about like up in this area here? This here? Okay, behind the tree. Gotcha? Is that right? Behind the tree? Okay. So first stop, second stop, and then, whoa, there's a whole bunch there behind it. And that's generally what the photographer's wanting is you notice the person first, but then you notice all this other stuff that literally keeps you drawn into the photo for a longer period of time than if it was just the person, right? Because you're wondering what's beyond that valley that you can't see. Your eyes are wondering, your mind's wondering, and by the way, your mind fills in the stuff that's not there. It begins to imagine what's beyond the horizon, beyond the trees, beyond the mountains. It begins to imagine why is she standing there? What's going on? So your mind starts doing that. But here we have, most of you thought of this first. First eye stop, second eye stop, and then third eye stop behind the trees. So that's a very strong focal point. Even though it's a very small focal point, if you look at her, when I zoom out, very small focal point compared to everything else in the image, right? The tree's bigger, the mountain's bigger, the vast valley's bigger, but the focal point is so strong that your eyes are drawn to it first. The composition is so strong that your eyes stick to that image. So it's usually best to have one subject as a focal point, like in this image here, and then because the photograph can successfully tell only one story, the main subject may be one object or several. You may decide to include a secondary subject, but make sure you don't detract at all from the focal point, which in this case was a person on the ledge. So lacking a strong center or interest focuses the viewer away from other things, and they kind of get lost real quick, right? You just get bored very quick. So that's it on focal point. Now let's go into rule of thirds. Rule of thirds this guy talks about too. So that's some pretty cool things to say about that. I'm going to go full screen. Let's go single page. There we go. So let's see what he says about rule of thirds here. He goes, the exact center of any composition is not satisfying place for the viewer's eyes to go. We talked about week one, how when we first start taking photos, we want to put everything in the center. He says that it's not the best place to put things. While the main subject is placed in the center, the viewer is less likely to explore the rest of the photograph if everything's in the center. So it's better and more pleasing to the eye if the object that you're taking a photo of is kind of off-center. And that's where rule of thirds comes in, where you can basically place the object, as I'm circling here on the overhead, in one of the four quadrants of the photo. Okay? So in this object here would be this vast, distant here space of little mountain pieces, but comparatively to all the sand and this over here, it's real small. But your eyes focus on this first, and then naturally gravitate to all the other items within the photo. And symmetry is putting everything together into where people can literally, this is what I'm going to look at first, this is what I'm going to look at second, this is what I'm going to look at third. And when you take a photo, that's what you got to start thinking of. What do I want my viewer to see first, and then second, and then third? If they're only seeing one thing, there's not enough things in the photo complementing that one subject. Okay? The only type of photo that you're going to get away with doing that would be like a portrait photo of just people standing there, families, individuals, right? But anything else, you got to have things vying for the person's attention. Not real big things. They don't want to overflow the focal point, but something that's going to keep people going and bring a natural tension to the photo. So here we have an example of the second one here, what do you think the focal point of this bottom one is here? We focus on that. So we have mostly sky, very little land. What do you think here is the focal point? What does your eye see first? Anybody? How many thinks the sky? How many saw the sky first? Okay. How many saw the mountains first? And then the sky second? Okay. Really, you could actually see both. You could probably have both. You could see both. So, because the mountains are, you know, not really small, but they're much smaller than the sky. But the clouds is what kind of like draws you in and kind of makes you kind of zigzag through this photo. Because you might notice in this photo, you've got this, you might notice this image here, this mountain here. Then you start noticing these little ones back here, these little ones over here, only because of all the clouds around it to kind of bring your focus in. And he talks about, in this one, a common composition faux pas occurs when the horizon is positioned directly through the middle of the frame, bisecting the scene. So if you utilize the rule of thirds, here's a rule of thumb you guys need to remember. If you're going to do sky and ground, it's always 1/3, 2/3. So in this example, what is the 2/3 in this example? The sky or the ground? Pretty simple, right? But you could flip it and have the sky be 1/3, the land be 2/3. You don't want it where it's directly in the middle. Because again, it's boring, it doesn't have any creativity, and people get lost in it. Next is simplicity, he talks about, just being simple. The best way to present a clear message in a photograph is to keep the composition simple. Just like the KISS acronym, keep it simple, stupid, right? Where we just keep everything simple to where we don't make it too complex. Where we can if we don't understand the photo, probably most people won't understand the photo. Okay? And so you want to make it simple, a clear message. So few elements you have to work with, the easier it is to design a pleasing image and control the viewer's eye. Because one of the things when you're starting to learn photography is that, yeah, you will control and you can control the viewer's eye, right? You can. If you put things in the right spot in the film, in the camera, in the portrait, you can control the movement of where their eyes are going to go. There are several ways to simplify this composition. It says the primary method is to move closer to the main subject. He says photojournalist Robert Capa said it best, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. So if you're not getting a good photo of something, just move a little closer. Physically move closer. Don't zoom in. Physically move closer into the photo. Whether you physically move into the camera or zoom, I suggest moving in closer physically. What's going to happen is as you get closer, you're going to fill the frame of the subject. Pairing as you get closer, the things around it will draw into that component, that main component. It removes visual distractions. It eliminates superfluous elements, defocuses the background, and makes things much, as far as busy background, be blurrier than it was before. So here's an example of some lines in the sand and mountains here. And what this is talking about is basically bringing in lines into the photo. So another compositional technique you can do is create energy is to have natural lines of the photo. It could be power lines, it could be a railroad track, it could be the lines on a road, it could be the lines of houses in a row, it could be lines of cars, lines of people, whatever. So, but what happens is when people see lines and curves in a photo, it should lead them to the focal point, the main focal point of the subject. Like in this example here, it's the mountains back here at the very back, but all these lines lead to the mountains at the very back. So some other factors he talks about, and we'll end with on this, is let the lines in your composition decide if the scene should be shot horizontally or vertically. If the scene presents long vertical lines, compose it to be a vertical photo. If it has a horizontal lines, make it a horizontal photo. Play to the strength of the composition will also avoid wasted space at the edge of your frame. And it says, be aware of white or light areas in your composition. The viewer's eyes will always go to the brightest part of the scene first. Eliminate any very bright spots that pull away from the main subject. Look for repetition and patterns. Compose boldly using sweeping lines. Be less boring by having just horizontal lines only, maybe some sweeping lines, maybe some curvy lines. And then try using a wide-angle lens. In this class here, we won't be using a wide-angle lens. We'll be talking about how you can kind of fake your camera out to get a wide-angle lens effect. And we will be talking about this semester, is composing what's called a foreground, middle ground, background. And what this means is this, and I'll draw this on the board. So you've got basically your subject here, and then you've got foreground, the middle ground, and background. We'll say this is your subject right here, okay? And what you're basically going to do is compose your photo to where your subject, the word and graphics and layout will be the subject pops out, like in a billboard. It really pops out. And I saw an image last semester I really liked. It was a family. It was over in, what's the museum we have here by Bell School? What is it? Somebody said it. The museum we have here that's near Bell School, it's got the windmill. Thank you, Midway Village. Midway Village! Okay, it was a family basically sitting on a hill there, Midway Village. What they did was a photographer had some leaves in front of the family, right? Sitting in front of the family like this. And then behind the family was some trees. And there was actually, what's cool about it, was they actually had, they shook the tree to where it was right around fall where the leaves were coming down. So in the photo was a foreground of leaves in front of the family. The family was here. And the background was a tree with leaves slowly falling down in the background, which really kind of gave kind of a 3D dimensional effect to a two-dimensional image, or really one-dimensional image. And so foreground, middle ground, background is a real vital way to bring out the image, bring out the subject. And we'll talk more about that, especially when we get into the portrait lab in week 11 and 12. So he just scratches the surface, but I thought we'd mention, and that last one's a really important one, the foreground, middle ground, background. It really does bring in dimension into your photos. Okay, so get your camera out. Get your camera out. I need you to go into week 3 and keep going next into week 3 in Eagle until you get to the in-class assignment. I'm not going to keep you real long tonight. In-class assignment. Especially on these in-class labs, I like to let you out a little earlier to where you can actually maybe get some stuff done before you go to bed tonight, or the take-home lab. The in-class lab is just that. It's in class. I want you to do it before you leave. And this is the last thing we're going to do tonight. Once we're through with this, I'm going to talk about your take-home and what I expect for that. And then we'll get your camera out to make sure everybody understands on your take-home what settings you're going to use and what you're going to play with this week. So on your camera, what I want you to do is get it out, and then in the 3 in-class exercise, you're going to list below in this submission all of your camera settings that you can find. An example might be on your little dial, if you have one, whether it's a phone camera or whether it's a digital camera, either one, high end, low end, doesn't matter. Find in there the examples of your camera selection. So this example here I give is auto, aperture mode, ISO mode, movie mode, close-up, sports, PAM, TV. I want no definitions. I just want what's on your camera. That's it. Okay? So take about 5 minutes and do that. Once you get finished typing all those in, submit it into this week's exercise, and then we'll do our take-home example together. And keep your camera out after you do this one because we're going to be going over the take-home immediately afterwards. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I want the bottom ones. And then also if you hover over where you just hovered over at the top, you also do have If you tap on, like that's your auto, turns around, don't need that one. So let's focus on the bottom ones. Let's focus on the bottom ones. Don't worry about those. And then also, that's post, so don't worry about that. So go back, and let's just focus on the bottom ones at the bottom. That's it, the slider ones. That'll work. If you need help, let me know. Yes, just what's on your wheel. That's it. Nothing more. No, don't need to find them or anything at this point. Now, what you might do this week, a little take home, I'm not going to grade you on it, but be wise probably as you're going over that dial. If you don't know quite what that acronym is at this point, I would get your manual out, whether you have to get online or dust off the one that's in your camera bag. You go over all the settings this week that's on your dial, and at least have a in your mind anyway, what this definition is of this setting, what it does, basically, right? Just kind of in your mind. Be good. Yep. Yeah, if you go to your main menu on yours, okay? Yes, all those, correct. Start at the top and then work your way down. And even the second one, yep. So you have that one, and the bottom one. Yep, all three. No, don't. That's your settings. I wouldn't worry about that one. Let's just go to the first two, which are your movie and your camera one. Yep. And then just type all those in. Okay, so let's go into your menu, and let's go up to the top. So you want that one. Keep going down. That one. Yep. All the way down. Keep going. Yep. No. Don't need that one. So just those right there is all you're going to need for right now. Yep. That's all you need. How you doing over here? Okay? And again, keep your camera out once you submit all of these. That would be great because we're going to go over, after you submit this, I'm going to walk around the room. So after you submit this, just go to the very next screen in Eagle, which is if you click the next button in this take home. When I see 3 take home on everybody's screen as I'm walking around, I'll kind of know you're ready to go over this, so I don't want to rush you. Take your time, make sure you get all of them in there. But then once you're finished and you've submitted the in-class, click Next to go to this screen here, which is the 3 take-home. Do it now. Yeah, just type them in there. Yep, that's all you got to do. Yep. And yeah, you might copy them and then just take out the ones you don't need and then add the ones you do. Oh, yeah, you'll sign in with your S number and password. You know what that is? Okay, go ahead and do that right now. You guys doing it over here? Okay. So once you submit your in class, if you could click the next button to go to this screen that's on the overhead, that way I'll know everybody's there. When I see this screen that's on the overhead on everybody's monitor, we'll go on. And you can go ahead and be reading the 3 take-home if you want to, because we'll go over it in just a second. Yeah, that takes forever long. While we're waiting, I did have I needed a volunteer Thursday. So if you can volunteer for, I'm getting ready to ask, come up and see me before you leave. I need a volunteer from like 7:45 to 8 o'clock just for 15 minutes to remote in to this Kubi device that I've got up here It's a telepresence device we're using for a handicapped student here on campus. We just got it in today. I'm wanting somebody to remote into it from home. You need a Chrome web browser with a camera and a microphone, and that's it. Or a headset with a camera, or a headset with a mic and your headset, and a video camera. You can do it on a laptop, desktop. You can also do it on an iPad if you have an iPad. So if you're interested for helping me for 10 or 15 minutes to log in via Chrome web browser with a video camera, microphone, headset, that would be great. Just want to test it out before James is a gentleman we're helping. I'm going to test out on him on Saturday. But I want to kind of get some other students' feedback on what it looks like on your guys' end at home. You'll be logging into a PCT 110 class, a Network Essentials class, on Thursday, just for about 10 or 15 minutes. So if you are interested, see me before you leave so I can email you the information of how to connect to it on Thursday. All right, how many still working on your settings? Okay, so if you look on the overhead, let's go ahead and go over your take-home. This is a contrast exercise, which we've been talking about tonight. You'll need to create a week 3 photo album in Foki, and you'll need to post the photos plus some answers here below that we're going to go over in the text box entry that you've got for this one. So what you're going to do in this one is you're going to walk around the campus, your house, your workplace, wherever, the mall. You're going to take 3 pictures of each of the below settings that we'll go over in a second that give itself to good contrast. After transferring your files to the computer, you're going to name them, and then we'll upload them to week 3, and we'll go over them in class next week, the first of class. You're also caption each photo you upload with the below information. We'll go over that. So you're going to focus on 3 settings, or 2 settings on your cameras. The ISO setting and the white balance setting. And on the white balance, you'll need to only focus on the auto and preset. You won't do any manual focus or manual white balance. So for ISO, what you're going to do is you're going to use 3 ISO ranges for each photo that you take in a row. So you might have, like, say, some of your cameras might have on the low end 100 ISO, and then 200 ISO, and then 300 ISO. But some of your cameras might have on the low end 100, 300, 500. Some might have 80, 100, 200. Whatever it is, I want you to be looking for that on your camera as we're talking right now to see what your ISO range is on your camera. Just as long as you start with the lowest ISO range, and then the next 2, you're fine. If you do have a manual mode on your camera, you're going to find ISO in there. Also, some of you will have what's called an ISO mode where you can do it there as well. And some of your cameras will even allow you to get to ISO in auto mode depending on your camera. But here's the settings that you're going to use for this assignment this week. The first photo setting is nature. So the location is you're going to describe the setting on your camera that you're going to use to make the contrast better, so white balance and ISO. So for nature, and by the way, just a disclaimer here, you're going to pretty much use the same setting, camera setting, on every one of these photo settings. All right, every one of these photo settings you're going to go. So the first photo setting is nature. So an example would be, you guys know where the student center is in the gazebo? We'll say that's your nature shot, right? So you're going to label these on your computer at home before you upload them into Foki. You're going to name it Nature 1, 200, if that's your low-end ISO, sunny white balance. Then Nature 2, 300 ISO shady white balance. And then Nature 3, 400 ISO auto white balance. The word best in parentheses is what you think the best exposure is out of the 3 that you took. All right. So if your camera has low end 200 and then 300, 400 in that succession, that's what you would use. And you would also use sunny, shade, and auto. Then the next one's people gathering. Find some place as a people gathering. An example I put in here was a student center. Again, people 1, 2, and 3, ISO 200, 300, 400, and sunny, shade, and auto for the white balance. And then again, you put in parentheses what you think visually the best exposure looks like visually from the photo. Vehicles is a third one. Look for a place around campus or your work, the mall that has, like the WTC parking lot would be a good example. And again, vehicles 1, 2, and 3, ISO 200, 300, 400, sunny, shady, auto. And then you put best to the one that is the best that you think as far as contrast or exposure. Then the other location, number 4, whatever location you want to choose on number 4. I put in here Cherryville Mall, food court, Mall 1, Mall 2, Mall 3, 200, 300, 400. Auto white balance. These actually should be sunny, shade, and auto white balance, the same as the other ones above. Then find out which one the best is. Then once you upload it to Foki, here's an example I put here. If my username is ChewCon, I put in Web225 week 3, and then I'm going to put, for the labels of the pictures, of each picture, the actual text, which would include what I just went over above. So you should have, when you upload them, the caption of the photo should have what the photo was, the ISO that you used, and what white balance you used. And out of the 3 of each setting, you're going to put in which one you think is the best on exposure. Okay? And that's what you'll submit in Foki. In this box here, what I want you to submit, really, if you put in the right information on Foki, all I need is that URL to your Foki week 3 is all I need. Because if you put all the correct information on your actual images, that's all I need. You don't need to put that text in here when you submit it. Does that make sense? So you're going to label the photos accordingly, find out the one that you think is the best exposure. So I'm going to kind of walk around. I want you to show me on your camera your ISO setting. If you can't find it, I'm going to try to help you find it. So kind of get your camera out and let me see. I want to see that you know where it's at least, and then we'll kind of help you determine what range of ISO you're going to use for your photos. And then we'll end by opening up a discussion on any questions you guys might have.